Everybody's ready. Hello. My name is Maggie Kuriakos, and welcome to the Westwood Library. How many of you were here in January? This is our second. Okay, awesome. Okay, so I'll make it a little short and sweet, but enough information that you know who we are. So I'm Maggie Kuriakos. I'm one of the senior advisors at Bridges by Epic at Westwood. I'm here with my colleague Pete Bruce, and he's actually going to be doing the presentation, so I'm just the filler here. And Debbie Higgins. Debbie Higgins is with Cornerstone Caregiving, private. Do you want to talk? Private home care in Norwood. How do I do?
Debbie Higgins, Cornerstone Caregiving in Norwood, your neighbor. I have a lot of clients here in Westwood. We are non-medical home companion care for anyone dealing with recovering from surgery, dementia, Alzheimer's, just need extra help, dressing, bathing. We run errands, drive, and so forth. But we're really here to just have a really great conversation and engage and educate the community. So ask a lot of questions.
So Debbie and Pete and myself, kind of, and Grace Doherty is also from Bridges. She's out in the community. We go out quite a bit and educate the community on dementia because it's extremely prevalent. If you don't know anyone that's directly affected, you probably know someone that knows someone that is dealing with this affliction. So you know, the biggest thing is just having us come out and talk to you and educate you. Power is knowledge. So that's why we're here. So just really quickly in some information about, can people hear me? About Bridges. So we are a memory care, all-inclusive memory care assisted living community in Westwood on University Ave across from Wegmans near the Amtrak train station. We are part of independent living, assisted living, and memory care, but Bridges is strictly memory care. So we have 72 apartments that are all inclusive. We care for all levels of dementia, from mild cognitive impairment to end stage. So we're an aging in place community. So our residents come, they move in with us, beginning, middle stages, and we can continue to care for them as they progress in the disease. But what makes us so special is that our residents that live with us are safe, they're happy, they're engaged, they're social, their loved ones get their wife back or their husbands back, and they get to really be able to enjoy their loved one if they end up moving in with us. It's not for everybody. This is just a picture of what we look like. Our living area, outdoor area. So what's really important, in addition to our community engagement as well as our life enrichment programming, is our outdoor space. Our residents year-round are out and about and get to enjoy the nice weather. So this is just part of what we do. We also do online Zoom support groups for caregivers for individuals with dementia as well as early stage dementia. And that's all free and available to the public. We actually have a sign-up sheet in the back. If you are interested in getting the information on our Zoom programming or our in-person education programs, put your name in there, your information, your email, and then we can get you on the email list, and we'll make sure that you get all of our information. All right, without further ado, I think I've spoken enough. Pete Bruce. Pete Bruce is my fellow companion colleague over at Bridges by Epic. He is a certified dementia practitioner, and he's going to be doing that programming today. Pete.
Thanks, Maggie. Maggie and I don't know, how long have you worked at Bridges for? A year, but you have worked for Epic. Epic is our parent company, and Bridges is the memory care side of what we do. I'm so glad to see so many folks here tonight. I think we had like 18 folks last time, and I think we've grown. Hopefully, we'll continue to grow, and we're going to continue to do these presentations. We probably have like 26 or more of these, but the series that we're presenting on, the first one was, is it normal aging, or is it memory loss, which that was last month. This month, obviously, it's actually it's called signs and stages, but we're going to talk about the signs first. And then we're going to be doing another presentation next month on effective communication. So they kind of build on each other. And some of these are for caregivers. Some of these are for professionals who just want to know more information about dementia and resources and things like that. And then we're going to have a panel discussion where we're going to talk. Debbie will be on it. We'll be representing the side of home care, where memory care, assisted living. We're going to have an elder law attorney. We'll have somebody from a great organization, the Westwood Council on Aging, and then we also will have a day program specifically. I don't know if you know what it's called, but it's called the Julia Ruth House, which is very close by, and we do a lot of partnerships with them as well. I am very aware of time consciousness. So these presentations are usually about 40 to 45 minutes long. We always want to have a time for question and answers. If we don't have the answer for you, we will get you the answer. If we get kind of bogged down with a question, certainly we might parking lot it and talk on the side or after or whatnot. All of our information, whether it's Debbie or Maggie or myself, we're a resource. As Maggie said, we come in here and we want to educate. Many of the folks that do go to a lot of our online programs and also live programs never will move into our community, but we do want to get the word out, because sometimes, there's some stereotypes about and stigmas that go along with dementia, and part of what we try to do is to educate, because it decreases that side of this this terrible disease. Let me ask you, how many are here just for education, just to learn, lifelong learners? How many of you are caregivers? Okay, great. And how many are here for just the food? I'm just kidding. All right. Well, I'm here for the food, but any rate, warning signs and stages. We'll get right into it. And if you do have a question, you don't have to wait to the end. Okay. If you have a question, so warning signs. Some of the things that we are going over tonight is kind of a piggyback on what we talked about last time, but it's a good refresher. What they say is that you really don't remember much of a presentation, about 5% over a long period of time, the 5% of information. So we're going to kind of review some stuff for those who are already here, but we talk about Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is one of many different types of dementias. Alzheimer's, though, is the most prevalent. So more than 50% of folks that are diagnosed with some form of dementia is Alzheimer's. So if you hear me going back and forth between dementia and Alzheimer's, know that most likely I'm talking about dementia. But in regards to the warning signs, memory loss that disrupts daily life, that's what we're really talking about. In our first presentation, there are some things that are just normal as part of aging. As we get older, our brains do shrink. It is natural. However, some things are not natural. So that's what we're going to kind of talk about for warning signs first. So if you're forgetting recently learned information and it's not being retained, one of the big concerns is about short-term memory. Forgetting important events. I do talk to folks a lot who have dementia, Maggie and I both, and they can remember what street they grew up on, or telephone numbers from childhood, or perhaps their children and birthdays and things like that. But remembering what they had for lunch may escape them. Asking for the same information over and over and over. This is a warning sign, asking constantly. Relying on memory aids for things they used to handle on their own. I've gone to folks' homes. I've done home visits. And sometimes a warning sign can be lots of different pieces of tape all over the kitchen and right by the door as they're leaving. Don't forget your keys. Don't forget to lock. Doctor's appointment, writing down different dates over and over and over, or talking about it over and over and over. Those can be warning signs. Challenges in planning or problem solving. So developing a plan, which might have been easy early in someone's life. I work with a lot of folks that their spouses were engineers or people who had to plan some things out. And now all of a sudden, they're not able to plan or even to remember how to get home, driving or whatnot. Or it could be following a recipe, something that has for a long, long time been kind of ingrained, knowing how to make a banana bread. That type of thing can happen a lot. Difficulty keeping track of monthly bills or working with numbers. A lot of times when Maggie and I get a call, it's when folks are having a lot of difficulty financially managing their own bills, and they may have now a team of people, whether it's daughter-in-laws and daughters and aunts and uncles helping them with lots of these kind of daily tasks that they used to do, taking longer to do things than they did before, as opposed to making occasional errors in a checkbook. That's something that just, it happens occasionally. The other thing is that to remember is that it's not just one particular thing that might be a problem, but it's a series. It's usually 2 or 3 what they call activities of daily living that are being affected by their recall and their memory. Completing familiar tasks can be another warning sign, things that used to be easy. I had a spouse that came to talk to me, and they said, a year ago, we used to go on road trips all over the place, and then now my husband can't remember how to get down to the grocery store in the car. He still drives. He can do that, but knowing how to get from point A to point B can be difficult. Trouble remembering the rules of a favorite game, issues with managing the budget at work. Sometimes workplaces and home life can be the first folks that actually see that there's some warning signs. What is normal is occasionally needing help to use settings on a microwave or some kind of new piece of electronic equipment. That happens. It's normal. Confusion with time and place. Losing track of dates, seasons, periods of time. I talked about, putting multiple dates around, making reminders to themselves. It could be issues around unsafe behaviors, like going out in the winter with no coat on or hat on or shoes on or things like that, or vice versa, putting a sweater on when it's 90 degrees out on a summer day. Trouble understanding something if it's not happening, if it is not happening immediately, or forgetting where you are or how you got there. Okay, I usually use the idea or the analogy of, when we go to the grocery store, you come out and you have your keys in your hand in the parking lot and you press the button to find your car. That's normal, right? What's not normal is coming out of the grocery store and wondering, why am I even here? Some other warning signs are troubles understanding visual images and spatial relationships. So difficulty reading or judging distance. That's when we see issues around fall risks. We see issues around fender benders. Trouble determining color or it should be contrast. May not recognize their own reflection in a mirror. These usually happen a little bit later in stages of dementia, general. And we're going to talk about the stages in just a little bit too. What is normal is just changes in vision, cataracts, macular degeneration, those types of things, but have nothing to do with cognition. Words and speaking and writing. It's also called aphasia. So challenges are following or joining in a conversation. When I was talking to someone right before in the back, and we were talking about the social piece, and when there is some warning signs of dementia and folks trying to keep up with conversations and joining in, it can be very difficult. And then there's the isolation, and we know that during the recent pandemic, there was some isolation, which caused people not to be a part of to use their language. So that can have a detrimental effect on folks' cognitive abilities. Struggling with vocabulary and finding the right word. Sometimes we call it, word salad. They may have a whole bunch of string of words, but they don't really all go together. We kind of call it word salad. There is some meaning in there, though, and there's some, in our next presentation, we're going to talk about effective communication with those who are struggling with dementia. So I encourage you to come to that one, too. That one's more of like a real nuts and bolts, what you actually can do to communicate well, or to be a good caregiver to those with dementia. Or it might be replacing words, like, instead of calling it a watch, calling it a hand clock. What is normal is, you might have tip of the tongue, oh, what's that word on, that is normal. Another thing that might be a warning sign is misplacing things or losing the ability to retrace steps. So in our previous presentation, we talked about what is normal and what's not normal is just not being able to retrace anything, any kind of task, or remembering it later on. We all have difficulties at some time with recall. It might be that we're tired, or we might have been under a great deal of stress, just trying to recall things. But when we're talking about warning signs of folks that actually have dementia, it's not being able to do that, and no matter how much time it might take, it's not going to happen. The inability to retrace steps to find items, or may cause accuse others of stealing them. That's something that we find a lot as folks at our community may have some paranoia around certain things being stolen when they actually haven't been stolen. They might have hid them somewhere and misplaced them, but the easiest thing is not to say it was me that did it, but it's not their fault either. What is normal? Misplacing things from time to time, like a pair of glasses. Poor judgment. So we're breaking all of this down into various areas of somebody's life, and so we're at poor judgment. But as I mentioned, spatial relations, word finding issues, all of these types of things are really things that doctors, like neurologists, are looking for. There are certain types of assessments that can be done to test this. Challenges with decision making, trouble dealing with money. We talked about that already. Sometimes we find that a lot of scammers will take advantage of folks, who are having a lot of difficulty around cognition. Paying less attention to hygiene is another symptom, but in and of itself is not a warning sign that somebody has dementia. Again, it's multiple areas of someone's life. Withdrawal from work or social activities. This kind of goes back to when folks are having difficulty performing anything, whether it's social, whether it's their work life, or maybe it's at home, preparing meals, any of that can cause people to isolate even more. So it's kind of a slippery slope or a snowball effect when folks remove themselves from various activities. We do know that there's a direct correlation between anxiety and depression and dementia. The higher the anxiety and over a prolonged period of time, it can cause dementia. Folks that are having difficulty retrieving words, interacting in games that they used to play all the time, remembering things or even dates can cause people to isolate more. Certainly the pandemic didn't help at all with that either. So what does that do? Folks avoid social activities, and we do know that there's a direct correlation. The research tells us that the more that folks are engaged socially, like tonight, what you're doing here tonight, even though you're static, you're sitting there and you're getting information, you're processing information, and it helps to stimulate brain cells. You're not, as there's a misnomer that people are born with all their brain cells and there's no more brain cells. That's not true. There's always a way that you can increase your brain cells by various activities, both physically. There's a lot of research out there on that. Physically, socially, all of that. Changes in mood and personality. Sometimes, as I mentioned, people can be suspicious. We talked about depression, fear, anxiety. There are certain types of dementia. So dementia is a umbrella term for cognitive impairment. And there's many different types of dementia. Some specific dementias have a profound behavioral component to it. So people flying off the handle, getting upset easily, crying a lot. So all of these can be warning signs. What is normal? Being when there's a normal routine that has been interrupted, people can get irritable. People can get upset. People can get depressed. So far, so good. Does anybody have any questions before I move on? Yes, Jim.
Differentiating between short-term memory and long-term memory, you did talk about that. Is either one of them, if either one of those is predominant, is that an indication of anything? Or is it always the short-term goes first and then long-term later?
Typically, it's the short-term memory. We find that it's the ability to have information taken in and to transfer to long-term. So it is, and it takes a while. It takes, I can't give you an exact number, but it takes some time. And there's certain things that you can do to make that kind of, that information or whatever it is, it could be a task, it could be meeting somebody for the first time or whatnot, to make it stick better. But like I said, if there's something is done as a routine, and that's one of the things at our community is that it's very important about establishing a routine. If you have if you're a caregiver and you have a loved one at home who has a routine, you keep it as much as you can. That again goes to the point about the isolation during the pandemic. That basically, a lot of folks that we've seen, there was an uptick on diagnosis of dementia and depression and anxiety during that time. It's unprecedented. We've had a lot of folks, just about a year and a half or so, start to really investigate the different resources, not just memory care, but all kinds of different care and support. But we do know that the recall suffers greatly when the routine is interrupted. Great question, Jim. Anybody else before we move on? Okay. All right, so the stages of the Alzheimer's disease. Again, I might go back and forth saying dementia or Alzheimer's, but there are 7 stages, at least there used to be 7 stages. We're going to continue to talk about it in breaking it even into 7 stages, but now it's known as more 3 different stages. But for this, we'll go with the 7. Stage 1. So stage 1 is that it's undetectable. Even medical professionals, there's no way to know if there is any kind of dementia that might be lurking. The the tests and blood tests and things like that, scans that can be done, the technology is becoming better. Partly, that's probably one of the reasons why we're having a lot more folks diagnosed and diagnosed earlier. But still, if someone is in the stage 1, it doesn't matter what age that might be. If they're starting in the early stage of stage 1, whether it's at 40, yes, 40, or 50, or 60, depending on the type of dementia, some can develop early, really early, and then some can develop way, way later. So we're talking about just stages in general, but that can happen at any given age. But there may be no evidence. One of the big points, if someone is saying, well, do I have a risk of developing dementia? There is a statistical significance between genetics. So if it runs in your family, there is that is probably the specific thing to look at. And neurologists would ask that question, or your PCP would ask if there was a concern. Then there's other things that can contribute to it too, like diet and exercise and anxiety, depression, even types of medications and types of things that you do for your life over your course of your life, just habits, which we can talk about too. Stage 2, minimal impairment. Sometimes as memory lapses or changes in thinking may occur. Forgetting familiar words or misplacing items. No symptoms of Alzheimer's or dementia disease can be detected during a medical examination. If there was a concern, there can be referrals to a neurologist. They can do a battery of tests. One is called the MOCA test. There's mini mentals that can be done. We do know that certain types of deficiencies, we talked about this in our previous month, the presentation, but there are certain types of deficiencies that can actually cause some memory loss as well, like a B12. Stage 3, mild cognitive decline. So friends and families or coworkers may begin to notice difficulties. So all those signs, those warning signs we just talked about, they start to see these happen. By the way, and Maggie mentioned it, I see a lot of people writing this down, and you're more than welcome to, because you might have some notes to put to the side. But we do have a presentation. We have no problem giving it out to you. I don't have enough copies here, but we can send you an email with the attachment, or call us if you don't have email. We can mail one out to you too. And we have a sign-up list in the back if you want that. A medical interview may be able to detect problems in memory or concentration. Those are the battery of tests that I was talking about, and they may run some blood tests as well. At this stage, the first one has a lot to do with the last one. So friends and family and coworkers may begin to notice difficulties, and then depression and other mood changes can also occur. So it kind of, one affects the other and vice versa. Continued in stage 3, common difficulties include problems retrieving words, difficulty remembering names when introduced to new people, noticeable greater difficulty performing tasks in social or work settings, and increased issues with planning or organizing. All these things that we talked about, warning signs, this is right around stage 3. Mild cognitive impairment. Maggie and I see a lot of folks who do come to our community at this stage, or they may reach out to Debbie for some home care. Come and get some home care done, or some light housework, or maybe some supports around around activities of daily living. Stage 4, moderate. So an accurate diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease is possible at this stage. The medical interviews should be able to detect clear-cut difficulties in several areas. They may have a writing test, a drawing test. These things can occur, and that has to do with how well the brain processes information. I said in our first presentation, when you look at cognition, it's like your brain has a file cabinet, and you pull out the drawer and you reach in and take something out and use it. You know, so for example, I know, I've seen this lady over here before. Her name is Maggie. So I'm getting information pulled out of my file drawer, and I've tried to remember it and keep it in my long term. However, that might not be happening when I've asked this question in some presentations before. Remember three words: cat, ball, teacup. And then later on, you know, I'll ask that question. Well, that's one of the questions that they might ask from one of these battery of tests. And it's to see how well you can recall. Some people that we work with can recall lots of information. Others, I could ask the question and then walk away and come back in a minute and a half and ask the same question. Or it might be like I'm meeting the person for the first time, and it's fact for them. They may be withdrawing from social situations, becoming defensive, or deny problems. At this point, we do know that from a caregiver standpoint, that a lot of caregivers try to fill in the gaps. Because as I had started this discussion, we talked about stigmas. And also there sometimes is promises made by the person who actually has dementia, saying, promise me you'll never do X, Y, or Z. And it's a heavy load for a caregiver to make those types of commitments, because behind every person who has dementia, it does take at least 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 people to try to continue to support that individual, and it can be very wearing in trying to do it all alone, emotionally, physically, socially, and it can feel for the caregiver a very lonely spot in their life. So one of the things that, and just as a segue, or a side note I should say, is that we do offer a support group online, and we have information we can provide. But we had a support group this morning at 11 a.m. We do this once a month in the morning, and another time at night once a month. And there's usually between 40 and 60 people on it. More than 90% will never move into our community, but we do know through the stories that we hear and the things that folks are trying to do at home as a support that it can be really hard. And it's a great service, you know, for us to be able to provide. And we have a lot of folks that have benefited just by having a group like you all are here tonight. You know, you're here for various reasons, but you care about this disease and what it can do. So, withdrawal from social situations. This is stage 4. Oh. Stage 4, okay. Forgetfulness of recent events, and as if they never happened, or taking events, multiple events, and combining them into a story that has no semblance of the real story. Maybe have elements of many different stories. It even could be their own personal history, but but they still know themselves and their families. Issues with handling finances due to mathematical challenges, numbers. Greater difficulty performing sequential tasks, so like we call it executive function. Step A, step B, 1, 2, 3, you do this before you do that. Even the simplest things like brushing teeth, what do? Break it down. And that's what we do, our caregivers do break things down. So, okay, we're gonna brush teeth. All right, we're gonna put out the toothbrush. We're gonna take the toothpaste. We're gonna put the toothpaste on the brush. We're going to brush up and down. We're going to rinse our mouth. We're gonna repeat all of this, right? So now I've just told you my whole routine, all right? Probably maybe the same as yours, I don't know. But these are things that you might have to do as a caregiver, and sometimes you do have to break it down to that point. And it's not, what doesn't work, and I'm kind of going ahead to our next presentation, but what is not helpful and not effective for folks that have dementia is you're getting ready to go to a doctor's appointment. So you're over doing dishes, and you say, "Hey, Henry, get ready. We're gonna go out to the doctor. So what I want you to do is to put your shoes on, put your coat on, and meet me in 10 minutes to go out to the car." Huh? So breaking it down, slow it down, one task at a time is very important. Yes? Correct. Early stages, you're not going to really see a lot, but as the stages develop, and they develop differently for different people and with different types of dementias, and I can highlight some of those as well. But what does occur is that it starts to be global in somebody's life. So all these things, and now we're kind of in the middle of the stages, right in the thick of it, when there's no way to hide this disease. So it's affecting folks in many, many different areas of life. Stage 5. The decline can be more severe. Gaps in memory and thinking are noticeable. Moods can be much more difficult to control. Requires assistance with daily activities such as choosing proper clothes for the season, occasional supervision during mealtime. But still, folks can be quite still social during this time, given the right environment, such as going to a senior center where they have a memory cafe, going to a day program, going to a memory care assisted living. These are all supports. Or getting together, in your family and having activities structured around that. Okay. More about stage 5, moderately to severe cognitive decline. The inability to recall things like address or telephone numbers. Confusion about dates and times, severe decline in numeric ability. Poor judgment that results in vulnerability to scams and safety. It's becoming more global. Inability to recall details about recent personal history, so it's the short-term memory. In stage 6, severe cognitive decline, there's no orientation to date or time or place. It's very common. That's why when we work with folks, and we'll talk about this in our next presentation too, is stay in the moment, stay in the day. It doesn't help to argue about, today isn't such and such day. It's irrelevant. What are we doing today? What makes the day special? What can we do that brings joy to somebody's life? That's the goal. That's the goal when we're talking about care and compassion for those who have dementia. It also requires extensive help with activities of daily living, including dressing and toilet and eating. And this is where the rubber meets the road for caregivers. It's when folks try to cobble together, and to their credit, at home, or family members, multiple family members, trying to manage, okay, I have to work on this day, you take Ma on this day, and then I'll come over and sleep over tomorrow at the house, and oh, by the way, I'm making a whole bunch of casseroles, we'll have all that together. Oh, and you're gonna take her to the doctor's appointment on Thursday, and then, yeah, we'll go out and do something nice, but we're not gonna go to the movie because she only has about a 5-minute attention span. So we'll keep it nice and simple, but we will have Uncle Joe come over and talk a little bit about what he's up to, because he'll be in town, but he doesn't really understand Ma at all. So it's like all this conversation about how to manage. It can be exhausting to the caregiver, but it's even more exhausting for the person who's living with dementia. And that's when you start to see a lot of behavior stuff come out too, and it can be hard.
In general, going from stage 1, I'm sure you get to stage 6, it varies by individual, it could be years or months.
Yeah, it's another great question or point, is that Alzheimer's in particular, the trajectory usually is like this, a slow arc. Years. It can be 10, 15. Sometimes folks can be in stage 1, 2, and 3 for decades. And then there can be like some significant issue, whether it's a health concern, maybe they went and got a hip replacement and they were under anesthesia, and all of a sudden, oh, now the decline has really come to a new plateau. There are other types of dementia, like frontal temporal lobe dementia, or vascular dementia, where it's more like a decline, like this.
I think Bruce Willis was just described with that.
That's right, frontal temporal. I read about that. It's tragic. He's got some issues around aphasia. He looks as healthy as a horse as he always has. And you see this big smile on his face. I was watching a video about his daughter, Rumor, I think it is, or whatnot, and they're having this grand old time out there, and he's walking in the woods and stuff, but he can't communicate. But you wouldn't know until you actually were having a conversation that he's got this affliction. So, different types of dementias have different stages and progressions. There is nothing that is predictable as much as the unpredictableness of dementia. Yes?
What about Lewy body?
Yeah, Lewy body is another one that can have its own kind of manifestation. Lewy body has some behavior components to it that can be quite concerning. There are some medications for all of these types of dementias that really can really help. Getting in the right environment and a consistent, especially for Lewy bodies, where frontal temporal lobe, vascular, Lewy body, there can be times when someone is right on it. You wouldn't even know that, and then it could be a certain time of the day where a whole different scenario is happening. Behaviors and strange occurrences, and even sometimes profanity and out of the ordinary type of behaviors that can happen. Behavior is indicative of emotional or physical well-being. We know that when someone is not doing well behaviorally, at least at our community we talk about this, is that it's usually some kind of unmet need. They're hungry, they're angry, they're lonely, they're tired, they've got some kind of pain somewhere. Maybe that's an itch that they can't get to, but it's something that it's an unmet need. So it's important to recognize that. Stage 6, continued, is the significant personality changes and behavior challenges occur. At this point, and it can happen in early, like the 5th and 6th stage as well, but more so, especially if someone is mobile still, like Lewy bodies and vascular dementia and frontal temporal lobe dementias. Folks are still sometimes able to, they're mobile, so you might see a lot of wandering or suspicious or delusional thought process. Compulsive behaviors like folding things all the time or putting things in drawers, multiple places, hoarding things. Had a gentleman move into our community, and his big thing was about toothbrushes. And he had to have like 20 different toothbrushes. Okay, that's harmless enough, no big deal, you know. What can be difficult is when folks are always saying, I need to go, I need to go, I need to go, I need to go to work, I need to go to work. And what we find is, you know, you don't argue, you know, dementia is the kind of thing where it may pass, and so, okay, let's redirect towards something else. And then, or we go with the flow, bend with the wind. Okay, you need to go to work. Let's get your stuff together. You know, your file folders are over there. Why don't you get them all organized, put them in, and I'll be back. Maybe I think we're supposed to leave in about 15, 20 minutes. I'll be right back. Sometimes that works. And then you say, you take care of that, I'll be right back. And then when you come back, they're sitting down watching birds outside, and you don't ever want to talk about work now, you know. Ability to distinguish familiar or unfamiliar faces. That goes back to the warning signs of sometimes mirrors can be a problem for some folks. When families that we work with come in, we do ask, do they recognize you? Because that helps us to understand the stage. And I got to be honest with you, where people are in a stage when we work with folks, it doesn't matter. We work with everybody. Debbie works with everybody. But it helps us to know kind of what we are going to need to do to support and kind of things that we don't want to go there, perhaps, on something. So if someone is having difficulty with facial recognition, okay, I'm not going to go up and say, you know, my name's Pete, and they're like, no, you're my brother Jimmy. Yeah, okay, go with it, you know. I have a lot of families that come in and say, my mom doesn't even know who I am. I'm just a person. They know that I'm a nice guy, but they don't know who I am. And it can be it can be heart-wrenching. But at the same time, we support our families and just say, you just got to go with it. You know, the treatment is go with the flow. Go with the flow. Sleep patterns can be interrupted. That's another thing that can happen. And what we find is sometimes medication is needed. Certainly when people are tired from their sleep patterns are off, then we know a lot of other tertiary things can happen, like falls, you know, which is an important thing. So sometimes medication's an important piece of the whole puzzle, and sometimes it's other things, such as keeping folks active and busy all day, as opposed to letting them take naps all day long, and then they're up all night long. Stage 7. So this is very severe cognitive decline. It's the final stage. Inability to carry on a conversation. Folks may not recognize that person, but I do tell folks that it's the emotion that you can give, you know, the sense of someone in a stage 7 or even earlier, but folks who are in stage 7 can still feel emotions in that emotional bond. They can understand frustration. They can understand fear, sadness, all of those types of things, whether it's, you know, the tone in the voice or the facial expressions or things like that. Sometimes there's loss of control over movement. They respond to environmental stimulation. That's why, you know, when we're at this stage, we may have more. We have at our community what's called a namaste room, which is a place where folks can kind of relax and have it a peaceful area, as opposed to going in where there's a 5-piece band, having a music concert or something like that. Support is required around the clock for assistance with personal care. Speech is severely limited. Sometimes there's some issues around swallowing. Sometimes inability to walk or sit without support. There's different types of equipment that can be used, thank goodness, because in the past it used to be, only a few decades ago, they didn't have the things that they have now. And it would lead to all kinds of other things, especially at nursing homes and whatnot, where bed sores can happen, or, pressure wounds and things like that. So that can happen. I do not like ending in that way, where it's the end. The concern is always, well, what am I going to do? And what I usually will say is that you're doing the right thing right now to get educated. When somebody is diagnosed with dementia, it is not the end. It's to be in the present with folks. And there's lots of supports. There used to not be a lot of supports. There used to be, 1 or 2 things that you could do, and usually they weren't very good. They might have helped around financial stuff. There might have been, some cobbled together care, but today there's tons of support out there, whether it's the Alzheimer's Center, or even more locally, the elder services and places like that really help a lot. I'd be curious to know what questions you all have. Yes? Yeah, so, sundowning is kind of interesting in the fact that you would think sundowning is at the end of the day, but it can actually happen at any time. Sundowning is usually at a certain time of day, and like I said, it doesn't have to be at the end of the day, but a lot of folks do after a long period of day. Now think about file cabinet. We're pulling out files all day and we're processing information. Well, guess what? For the person who has dementia, that's exhausting. So close to the end of the day, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there can be some behaviors that go along. Severe confusion, repetitive behaviors, saying they have to get out of here, I have to go home, I have to go do this or that. Suspicion, where did you put after a whole day of putting things all over the house and now looking for those things all over the house. So it is kind of like a bewitching hour, but think about it could be at any kind of time of the day. If they're up all night, then their late day is 9 a.m., 10 a.m. in the morning. So behaviors usually go along with this, and usually there's a lot of emotional issues around that too. So.
Does your group do an analysis of where someone might be?
Yeah, we don't do an analysis. We do assessments before somebody moves in, but typically it's the neurologist first, going to a primary care physician, and they would be able to refer you to a neurologist, and they would be able to determine, just like the slide said, that if you went to a primary care physician, they're going to be able to, in probably the 2nd and 3rd stages, determine what stage that would be. Again, diagnosis and stage is not necessarily the be-all and end-all, but it helps to know where someone is, because then if you know where someone's at, you can implement strategies to support. You all, without even knowing any stages, and if you are a caregiver, you're already doing a lot of implementation of strategies. Yeah.
Are there any groups that you report scammers to? Like my mom keeps getting had by scammers for
Yep.
warranties. Like it comes in the mail and makes you seem like you haven't paid something,
Yep.
and then it's like she signed.
Typically, and I have intervened before, and I just call the police. There's a scam hotline as well, but the police are a good start, and then they can refer. I've even had to contact the FBI to go to that route because it's become such a large scam that's going on. Sometimes you might even see on the news or on the internet that there's in this particular area there are scammers that are hitting the Westwood area or whatnot. Usually there's some public service announcements around that, but the police know how to help in that regard.
I know you said that things can vary from patient to patient, but typically on average, Maggie or yourself, how long would you say if somebody's in solid stage 5, breaking into stage 6, before they get to like the stage 7 area where they need that full-time health care?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's hard to predict when someone's going to turn to the next stage. It could be a number of things that could happen. It could be an environmental factor, like for example, a urinary tract infection. So someone could have a urinary tract infection and they were in stage 5, and then all of a sudden that might cause them to be in stage 6. So it's hard to know when that might happen, but there are environmental factors. I mentioned also about when someone might go to the doctor to have surgery done on a hip. They're under anesthesia. Sometimes that can affect folks. There's a thing called anesthesia that is related to dementia, and so that's another type of environmental situation which could turn it. If there is a change in someone's routine, or let's say someone is doing okay, but they're going to go on a trip. I've seen this happen before, and they come back. The trip was miserable, and now they were disoriented during the whole trip, and they come back and they're now at a different stage. So these are all things that can happen. So it's really hard to say this is when this is going to happen. There is no time to say. I have other folks who have certain types of dementias, young, we're talking in their 40s and 50s, that it's a rapid change for them. Usually, there's a rule of thumb that when someone is diagnosed earlier, sometimes there's much more rapid changes that can occur. Whereas traditional dementia, it can be decades where there's hardly any noticeable changes. So there's no one size fits all and one particular rule of thumb for that.
So just a little follow-up. So in the case of FTD, is there anything more specific that you might say, going from, say, the middle of stage 6 breaking into stage 7? Is it typically months, years, aside from the environmental treatments?
Yeah, I'm not a doctor, okay?
Just asking from your experience.
Yeah, from our experience, it can be years for this transition. Not a lot of years either for like FTD, frontal temporal dementia. It can be more rapid, and it can be years, not decades. Yes.
My mother had Alzheimer's like 37 years ago, and that was like, she was like the first one out of anyone we knew, you know. And we lived in Boston, and it started to get bad. People were breaking into the house, so my father said, we have to get out of here. It was the worst decision, but we didn't know. From that day on that they moved out, she never knew any of us. She went from like 3 to 6 overnight.
Yeah.
Then she started wandering, and then now my brother has it. He was diagnosed when he was 60. He's 69 now, but he did the same thing. His son passed away, and he went from stage 3 right to 6.
Yeah.
and right now he's in stage 7. He doesn't talk.
Yep.
He's, one day I'll go in and he can swallow, the next day he forgets how to swallow. They put him on hospice, like right before Christmas. We didn't think he was gonna last, and he's still around now.
Yep.
So you just don't know.
Yeah, and and I'm so sorry about, it's a difficult story, but I will tell you this, when I talk to families and they say, we shouldn't have done this or shouldn't have done that or whatnot, I say, you do the best you can at the time. You had the information to go with at the time. There should never be any guilt or anything like that or shame or anything with this terrible disease, but you do the best you can at the time. With that being said, is folks who have dementia, in a way, are resilient. There are folks that are fighters. I've seen folks who hospice has said, yep, we're the experts, and they are declining, and they'll most likely be, hospice is like they do angel work, right? So, but at the same time, is they're doing the best they can to predict things like this. And I've seen folks rally and do really well for another 6 months or a year or come off of hospice. And then it's all about making sure they get the right treatment for whatever there is no medication that's going to correct this disease yet. There's some research out there. There's nothing that's going to reverse anything. But there are things that can be done to support and sustain someone. There are medications for early onset that can actually sustain someone for quite some time, but then at some point those medications kind of taper off and they don't have the efficacy over a long period at a time. They get better and better, but then it's the same thing about the care. If someone's getting the right kind of care just from an activities of daily living, folks can live a long time. If they're getting hydrated correctly, they can live well, hydrated, food, nourishment, medication, social support, all of that. Don't underestimate human touch, laughter, music. All of these things are so, so important to keep someone vibrant.
Just to make the comment, you're here getting educated. That's huge, because no matter what the trajectory is for a person that you love and you want to take care of, and we don't know the time frame, at least you have an understanding that you have some information, you have knowledge. I think that helps in and of itself, in your, whether it's 6 months, a year, or 5 or 10 years, at least you have an understanding what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's very true, Grace. Yes.
Sometimes my mom gets me confused with the girl or the worker who was here the other day. So are you saying I shouldn't say, I usually just say, oh my, that was me, but you think I shouldn't say that, or?
It's all dependent on the circumstance, how frequently she might be calling you that. If there are certain times when, 5 minutes later, you're her daughter. But sometimes just going with the flow is the best route to go. There's no need, if she starts to say, emotionally argue with you, no, you're not my daughter. I know my daughter. She's at work or she's doing whatever. If it elicits any kind of negative emotion, just go with the flow, and not to argue with her on anything, except there's a caveat when there's a danger. So if they're saying they need to go, or if they are going to get in the car, or if any number of things that are unsafe, I'm going to cook, any of those types of things is the caveat. So, yeah. Yes.
You mentioned urinary tract infection earlier, and I'm just curious, somebody asked me, you mentioned with that, yes, that's a sign that she's really young. Is there a specific time to go back stage that happens in? Or does it happen at any of those stages?
It could. I mean, there's a number of things that can happen, right? So it might not be forgetting to go to the bathroom. It might be that someone, are our plumbing gets a little bit, it doesn't work as well when we get older. All right? For various reasons and for various genders. But at the same time, it is important to understand that, that incontinence is part of life as we get older. And just because someone has an accident doesn't necessarily mean that they have dementia. Again, it goes back to, we didn't even talk about incontinence, right, up here on the stages, but we find that a lot of folks have incontinence issues. But just in and of itself doesn't mean that they have dementia.
So I guess I was asking, like, I know other people take like home health and they should get cross-trained. Her, I'm not sure, Alzheimer's to kind of,
Yeah.
nobody knew because she didn't speak up.
Hmm.
So I guess like, it's just something to really watch for.
Yeah, UTIs are,
They usually legal, but for her, they weren't.
yep, and sometimes that's the case, is that UTIs sometimes are not painful, and some types of dementias that there is no pain. I remember one gentleman who was walking around, not at our community, but we did an assessment. We noticed that he had a big wound on his foot. He was walking around with something in his foot, in his shoe, and he didn't ever know that there was a wound. He didn't know. This wasn't at our community; it was at home, and then we assessed, and we're like, oh my goodness. So it's the same thing with urinary tract infections. Sometimes there's a pain, and sometimes there isn't. So the good thing is that there's medication. But typically, when we're working with somebody, whether it's in their home or at our community, if we see a behavior issue, then we know, hey, we better check for the urinary tract infection first, because if someone's not getting clean and bathed very well, that's just one example. There can be a urinary tract infection that can develop easily. So we also know that when folks don't hydrate themselves as much, that can cause urinary tract infections as well. So hydration, don't underestimate the hydration piece. Is very important. So, yep. And that goes along with a whole bunch of other issues. People don't want to hydrate because they don't want to have an accident, because they might have mobility issues, or they don't want to be embarrassed because it might have happened to them. I can tell you right now, one of the most significant emotions there are for folks that have dementia is being embarrassed. When people are embarrassed, and it doesn't matter if it's someone who has dementia or not, who likes to be embarrassed? Nobody. So care is really the key when we're talking about dementia, so. Well, you guys are quite a lively group with rapid fire. Anybody else? We're going to be here for a little bit, If you guys have, I know we're a little bit over, so if you guys have any other questions, we're here to answer anything. And I want to thank Debbie and the Westwood Library staff. Maggie, Pete, that's me. That's our emails. If you want a presentation, you get in touch with us. And thank you, Grace, for coming tonight. So, and thank you, Debbie, and thank you, everybody out there. So, all right, thanks again. Have a great night. All right.